Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Welcome to r/ProRevenge, where people get the revenge that they truly deserve. So let's not waste another second and get straight into this first post by user/Horatius Cockleys. Back when I was still in university, I used to work for a hotel to make ends meet. When I started, the hotel very urgently needed new personnel. So I cut a deal with the old owner about getting to choose and pick shifts, so that I could visit my courses and exams. Speaking some extra foreign languages, I also got a little bonus each month on top. The old owner was a great guy. He owned multiple hotels, so I rarely saw him. But when he was in the house, he always made a point to have drinks with the staff, chat with us, and if we were free, he even invited those of us at the front desk to fancy restaurants, if we weren't on shift. Fast forward. I had worked in the hotel for a few years now and was nearing the completion of my studies, so it wouldn't have been an eternity until I had to quit anyway, as I was of course more interested to work in my field of study. As part of my deal with the old owner, I mostly chose to work night shifts, allowing me to visit my courses at university during the day. To make up for my privileges, I had picked up the habit of doing some extra work in the dead of night other shifts would normally have to do, when I, on contrast, could have sat around and stared at the walls. People were grateful for the help in the beginning, and we became a rather tight-knit group. But over time, people rotated in and out. When the old owner retired and his butthole of a son took over the business as the new owner, I already feared the worst. The new owner didn't like me very much. I never found out the exact reason for that one. I was at that point nearly the sole veteran left from when I started. Among the tasks I had taken on was doing light clerical tasks to ease the manager's job in the morning. For that, I generally had to use the manager's network account. One night, while doing my lists, I logged into the manager's account and emailed to do my job. Then, I saw an email with my name in the subject line. I know it's not nice to snoop, but of course, I read it. Turns out, the new owner wanted to get rid of me. I still had my old employee contract with the bonuses for foreign language abilities and was allowed by my contract to pick and choose shifts. I can only assume these privileges are what made the new owner hate me. No idea if he had any other reasons, because, to be honest, these seem very weak to me. But he couldn't fire me without cause. On top of that, I would be owed severance if fired, and generally, there were not enough bodies in the shift rotation without me. Though the new owner didn't seem to understand that point as the emails told me. I looked for more emails concerning me and found them. There was an email chain between some of the employees, the manager, and the new owner. I was of course not CC'd, as I was the hated topic. The employees didn't like me hogging the night shifts because those paid better and every night you worked, you got paid the night bonus. The manager was the only one rather neutral on the matter and just curbed their enthusiasm to get rid of me, as they needed me to be fully staffed. The new owner and my colleagues actively conspired to make a hostile work environment so I would quit on my own volition. I was furious. I thought about a variety of reactions, from egging their cars to burning down the hotel, but I settled on a less crazy method of revenge. I called my uncle at 2 AM asking for advice. My uncle is a lawyer, so for the sake of proof, I forwarded myself all the emails. I made photos, printed them out, made copies, and filmed the whole deal just to be sure. My uncle told me to sit tight and see if things got worse, or if it was just bluster, and so I gave it a few days, and things did take a turn. Snide remarks about my looks, clothing, and so on were only the tip of the iceberg. Some of my colleagues were just as professional as before, but the conspirators always left extra work for me, or pawned off some of the duties they normally had to do onto me. I always kept a spare shirt and suit at work, just to have a change, which suddenly disappeared. One guy even started to threaten me with violence. But I kept clenching my butt cheeks. I would not give them the satisfaction of saving on the severance or giving in. I'm a big boy after all. I did, however, stop doing any extra work, which in the end was the reason they used to fire me. They still had to pay me the severance. The next day, my uncle, with bundled proof of the email and all documented harassment by my colleagues, served the hotel my lawsuit. It started with wrongful termination and ended with harassment. Reportedly, the manager went white as a sheet, when he realized where the emails must have come from. The new owner had been on vacation and had to cancel his expensive vacation in France to deal with it. Their counsel advised them to settle it, so I accepted my severance and a hefty bonus on top. Enough money to last me until the end of university without work. But that was not all of my revenge. I had gone after the new owner's money, but in the next step, I went after the hotel. I'd used all the spare time during night shifts alone to document every last violation of city, county, district, state, and federal law I could find. That went from minor things like some harmless mold under the kitchen sink to substantial violations like modifications to the building. The building was under a limited form of historical protection by federal law, on the ground of being built and inhabited by somewhat important historical figures a few hundred years back. So every renovation or change in the floor plans had to be signed off by a committee, which can take ages. There's also a grant paid to the new owner by the government for keeping the building intact as is. So with my uncle's help, I sent documentation of every violation I could find to the corresponding agency. In 1 month, everything from health, building code, fire safety, to the finance and work police crawled over the hotel. In the end, it was the building and fire inspectors that shut the place down. The new owner had done substantial renovations to the top floor luxury apartments, which he used when he was in town. So the new owner had to pay back the grant, pay fines for unauthorized alterations to the building, endangering his guests because something wasn't built right according to the fire code, and had to close down shop until the building was fixed. I also tipped off a friend who had studied journalism and worked at a local paper. The paper ran an article on all the violations accumulated, which tanked the business once it had reopened, as the newspaper article had led to horrible reviews. In the end, to afford all the fines, repayments, and building costs, the new owner sold the hotel. As the cherry on top, all the buttholes who tried to harass me out lost their job. Granted, the people who didn't do anything to me lost their job too, but didn't do anything to stand up for me or help me either, so I don't feel too much remorse. And the revenge cherry on top was that the new owner, whenever he was in town, used to bring home escorts, which in my country isn't illegal, but he was married. It took some digging to get that information to the owner's wife, but one of my former colleagues, who had quit before this all had happened, had her email. So I let her know what the new owner was up to when he was out of town. I don't know what exactly happened, but they did divorce in the end. Make of that what you will. Wow, that was done so smoothly. It's rare, even on this subreddit, to see a revenge so good and so well executed. And here's our next post by user/Ghost of Sarabi. Some years ago, I got a gig working a weekend music festival. Fairly simple too, 10 bands per day and all pretty standard rock and roll fare. Boss man puts 4 of us onto the rig. Me, Dreadful Boris, Big Chris and Hammer. He also said we'd be taking out an apprentice, a young lad who was the son of a local promoter. Well, always nice to have an extra pair of hands, and it's good to help train the next generation. After all, that's how we learned it in the past. As it turned out, this lad was about as much use to us as an aqualung to a trout, and had an entitled attitude the size of a mid-ranged African country. On the journey down in the truck, he was boasting as to how he was a really good sound engineer, and that he could probably show us a few tricks. Oh really? We get to the venue and get busy unloading the truck. We've got a 16-tonner stuffed to the gills with 2 sound desks and about 16 kilowatts of sound gear for front of house and about 6 kilowatts of monitors. As you might imagine, this is pretty heavy stuff, and it takes all of us to safely unload it and get it stacked up in place. Except that, after unloading the first amp rack, all on wheels but still around 80 kilos, the entitled brat snottily announces that I'm a sound engineer, not a humper, and promptly strolls off. Okay? Well, we don't really need him gumming up the works. We're all well used to slinging boxes around, so about an hour later, we've got the rig stacked and strapped down, run out the multi-core to the front of house desk, and are ready to start cabling up and tying power into the on-site generator. Out of nowhere, the spotty oik emerges from whatever hole he had buried himself in and asks what he can do. I say, I'm going to plug up front of house, perhaps you could help hammer cable up the speakers. I don't take orders from girlies. Quick side note here, Hammer was a 5'9", drop-dead gorgeous, and as hard as nails, hence her nickname. She was also a damn fine front-of-house engineer and a bloody good mate. Boris, Chris and I collectively groaned inwardly and winced in anticipation of a full 16-inch broadside from Hammer. Seriously folks, you don't mess with her unless you want the family jewels dangling from the nearest tree. Instead, she smiles sweetly, never a good sign, and says, "Well, I'm sure you'll learn something useful." I then go off to play with Cable's front of house, while Boris and Chris busy themselves with the monitors. A while later, I'm back on stage. Spotty Oik has wandered off again. Hammer has the resigned look on her face. What happened, I ask? Turns out that despite cables and connector ports being well labelled, the Oik had managed to get a complete pig's ear of plugging up the amp racks. Trust me, it's very hard to make this kind of mistake. I found the Oik some moments later and told him that it was not the proper way of doing things, and that if he wasn't sure what to do, he should always ask one of us beforehand. What then came out of his mouth absolutely floored me. I don't need to know all that stuff, I'm a sound engineer. Hammer, who was standing a few feet away, snorted derisively and rolled her eyes heavenwards. It took me a few seconds to process this particular nugget of stupid. Well, you have to know how all this works. It's part and parcel of the job, and as you're here to learn, I suggest you pay attention. Well, you're just a bunch of roadies, what do you know? Upon delivering this charming bon mot, he ambles off again, leaving me to retrieve my door from off the deck, and Hammer barely able to restrain a fit of laughter that would have incapacitated a rhino. At a guess, this idiot thought he was going to be white-gloving front of house for the whole gig. An hour or so later, we're all set up, and we now have a fair idea of the acts that we're going to be performing. In situations like this, you rarely get the opportunity of a full-blown sound check, so you have to rely on experience to set the desk up from cold. Luckily, we got the first act on stage a half hour before the kickoff, so I could quickly get a rough sense of the overall setup. A bit of exposition. It's convenient to reuse channels across acts, so I generally keep the first 20 or so channels for drums, bass and guitars, and the last half dozen or so channels for vocals. If a band comes in with anything else, percussion, brass, Tibetan nose flutes, etc., we whack them on channels in the middle. This keeps things nice, simple, and consistent across the board, and becomes important in a moment. The working procedure in show is also simple. Dreadful Boris and Big Chris run the monitor desk, and Hammer and I run front of house. We'll do 2 acts each before handing over to the others. That saves wear and tear on the ears, and when we're not running the desk, we'll handle setting up the stage for each act and troubleshooting where necessary, as well as doing runs for food and coffee in between. We also tasked Spotty Oik with helping with the stage setups, which rapidly proved problematic. We finished the first act and aimed to do the turnover within 15 minutes. Generally, the incoming act will tell us their mic requirements, and we'll write up a mic plot, which then gets sent up to the front of house desk. Up comes Spotty Oik with the mic plot, and he goes back to help with the stage setup. As I'm checking each mic, I notice that I cannot hear the vocal channels. No sooner had I spotted this than Dreadful Boris comes on the intercom and asks me if I can hear the vocal channels. He can't hear them either. He then goes off to check the soundstage where all the mics are plugged into. From all the way out front, I hear him shout, "F me." Seconds later, he's back on the cans. Do you know what that effing idiot has done? Only repatched all the vocal channels so that all the plugs on the stage box are lined up neatly one after the other. His words. Ye gods! Boris rapidly repatches the mics and we're good to go again. A few hours later, and I'm starting my second shift out front. I won't bore you with my experiences of riding herd on Spotty Oik on the stage shift, which, shall we say, was interesting. Currently on stage is a rather nice jazz septet. Give me a nice 20-piece big band and I'm a happy bunny. Up strolls he who shall not be mentioned and asks, "When can I have a go at mixing? I'm really good, you know." Seeing as he's here to learn, I tell him he can take the next act under my supervision. This happened to be an acoustic duo, 2 guitars and 2 vocals. Even the most tyro engineer should be able to handle something so simple, right? Wrong. I've already set where I regarded a sensible bass line on the faders for him to work with. First thing he does, he reaches for the master faders and cranks it another 15 decibels. No! Immediately the rig teeters on the edge of feedback and I rapidly pull the mains back. Look and listen. Balance out the two vocals, then the guitars. Leave the mains alone. He then starts making wildly inappropriate changes to the channel's EQ. Again, the rig starts to squeak. Okay, enough. I shove him out of the way and bring it back under control. I won't fatigue you further with the endless catalogue of foul-ups and attitude that he managed to affect over the rest of the weekend. Suffice to say that despite the best efforts of myself and Hammer to try and teach this guy, they all went to naught. Couple this with the constant drip of snide commentary about how he was really a better engineer than the rest of us, and by the end of the weekend, we're all pretty mad. Come the end of the event, and it's now the fun part of striking the rig and loading out. I'm being sarcastic about the fun part, by the way. 2 solid days, and we're all knackered. And the last thing we want to be doing is the get out, but of course, it has to be done. It's always an all-hands-on-deck situation, except the spotty oik has, once again, vanished into the woodwork. 2 back-breaking hours later, and we're all done, and the truck loaded to go home. So where is the spotty oik? Nowhere. We give it a good 15 minutes, but no joy. We then decide to go look for him, so we spent another 20 minutes trolling around the site trying to find him. Again, he's done a disappearing act. We get back to the truck, it's now close to 3 AM, and almost simultaneously, we say, F him. We climb back aboard and drive the 250 miles back to the warehouse to unload. Next afternoon, boss man calls me to find out why we'd left the spotty oik behind. I gave him the cliff notes and was then told that the oik had to call his dad at 3 in the morning to come and get him. A 500-mile round trip. He then said, I never liked that promoter anyway. He was always late paying the bills on previous gigs. Next time he calls wanting a rig and crew, I think I'll tell him to F off. And I guess, like father, like son. But I've just got to ask one question. How can you be a sound engineer without knowing how to set up your own equipment? That would be something like me saying I'm a Reddit YouTuber, but I don't know how to set up my mic. Seems pretty absurd to me. But alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this little video as much as I did. And if you did, make sure to subscribe to the channel for Reddit videos every second day. But with that said, that is it from me. I hope you all enjoyed, and all I want to do is see you all here next time. See you later, guys.